you get the girl?
What's that?
Did you get the girl?
No, I got a cute one. Sorry.
Damon, can you say something about the regional family history? Where's your family from?
Yeah. Well, I'm black. Therefore, my family's from the south. Just a question of how far back you go. I'm from California. My mother's from San Francisco. My father's from Sacramento. His mother and father are from Sacramento and San Francisco. My mother's mother and all of her family are all from Memphis. My paternal grandfather divorced my paternal grandmother and then remarried with a Chicago native. So all of my dancing comes from those three main areas. So Memphis, from Chicago, and from San Francisco, specifically like Oakland, 7th Ave, which probably means nothing to anyone here. But if you were like 50s, 60 years old, black, and from California, you know exactly what I mean. Yeah, so I mean, it's a lot of it is a very more juke joint oriented kind of style that I do. But my great aunt also spent summers working at, I think, her uncle's bookshop or something in Harlem. So she used to dance at the Savoy Ball. And so I learned my ballrooming, my Savoy walk, and stuff like that, primarily from her, and then that's how I learned for a while. That's where I learned the rest of it. You know, Frankie was my mentor for, ever. That's where my dance comes from. Geographic.
You know, my family background is Florida and Alabama. And most of in fact, my mother has my great-grandfather's cell papers, slave papers.
Wow.
From the Florida block. Anyway, yeah, so Florida and Alabama is where my family's from. I learned how to, actually when I started to learn Hindi, I was about 14 or 15 on the Sampson Highway between Sampson and Geneva, Alabama, in a little place called Bobby's, with a guy who was already like 65, his name was JJ. And he said, I was trying to learn how to Hindi up, he was like, who teach you that? He said, because back then, nobody counted. They just danced, right? So it's like, no, it's like, ba. Okay, now you do it. No, you missed one. No, do it again. So yeah, so that's how I learned. That's how I learned that. So thank God for training, because teaching people like that is kind of hard to do, you know.
If you're not raised with that music, they scat something out.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out how to super difficult.
Yeah, but when but that's how you get taught. After a while, you expect that because everybody does it, and that's the only way you can learn, because that's the only way they can tell you. So if you're either going to learn or you're not going to dance, and they will not let you not dance as soon as they see you have some talent. They make you, right? They get you out there. They make you keep doing it over and over until you get it. Anyway, yes, they know my granddad drove on this highway in the bar that I was even supposed to be in, and that's how I learned to be. So yeah, I mean, my southern background is very strong. My granddad was from Alabama. My mother's family was from Florida. Really far south in Florida, like as far south as you can go, it's still be in Florida. We were 10 miles to the Florida line from Geneva, Alabama. My family was from my mother's side of the family. My father, his dad, they moved up to Grand Rapids in the Michigan area, and that's where I spent most of my time with my dad's dad. And then some summers I went back and I worked in the fields at my mom's dad's house. So I picked pretty much everything that grows, pretty much. Everything from cotton, tomatoes, tossed watermelons when I got older, cherries, apples, blueberries, you name it, I picked it. At some point in time, working with migrant workers, and that was a way of living. We all pitched in because we was all poor.
Questions?
So we get that background out of the way.
Thank you. It's really interesting too.
Yeah, well, no questions.
Okay.
Got plenty of stuff to talk about.
I've got one. So Jay had asked about leverage and counterbalancing with a stretch.
So, and it's something that I was wondering about because, like, obviously this was originally taught in like a way that was just sort of like, here, pick this thing up. This is how we do it. You do it now. And there wasn't a vocabulary around it. So how did this vocabulary get applied? Like, when did that happen? What's the history of
Well,
that?
it depends. It depends entirely on where and when you learned. You know, talking to my my step grandmother, the one who lived in Chicago, and then the ones who lived in Memphis, they would call the same thing different names. They have different terms. You know, the family in Memphis, they were all street dancers, which, you know, I was. I didn't start getting into, you know, the ballroom stuff until I was in my 20s. But, you know, I did hip hop and, you know, for lack of better, jazz, like literally just dancing on the street in clubs at 13. And we just, you know, made up words for it. But, you know, as I, you know, started studying, you know, as I started becoming classically trained and started learning, you know, in ballroom formats, they had words that they used that came from different dances, and sometimes they would just make stuff up. You know, Arthur Murray decides that this is a twinkle. It's a twinkle, and everybody in every studio across the world calls it a twinkle. And yes, it's a real step.
Oh, God. Yes, yes.
Yeah, the magic stuff.
Okay.
The magic stuff. And it's a term. It's a term that we made up to describe a certain type of term in the Arthur Murray system. It's actually patented. A patented term. No other system can use the magic stuff. You can do it, but you can't call it that. Because the name itself is patented. So, you know, this is crazy because some terminology has been devised by the system that created it or presented it to the world.
Mm.
It's like people were doing it, but they didn't call it nothing. The guy who packaged it, right, he gets the name because he's the one who called it something that everybody started calling it. Yeah. And the system was put into basically all the studios around the United States. So if you got the money and you start opening franchises all over the place, and all of a sudden you're a national chain, and everybody in your studio is using your system, and you call it a twinkle, everybody's going to call it a twinkle. And that's what it grows up being. Yeah? Most of the ballroom dancers came out of the Murray system that have split off from there. Most of the independents all started with Murray's, or Fred Astaire, one or the other. So they use the same base terminology. Is it a twinkle? I don't know.
Sure, why not?
Okay, but so this is a name for a move. Most of the dynamics stuff comes from the performing arts. I learned leverage and I learned counterbalance from the performing arts. I didn't learn from ballroom dancing.
So by performing arts, you mean like
Ballet, tap, and jazz.
Tap,
Absolutely,
okay.
absolutely.
And that's, yeah, actually pretty much the same for me.
You know, this is all about dynamics, right? Ballet's all about dynamics, and when you learn how to partner, you have to learn how to counterbalance. You have to learn the leverages, and I learned my terms. Those are the definitions I have. That's where I got it from that genre.
So one of the things, like terms, like I said, so depending on when you learned and where you learned, you have certain words that you know as being this thing and being that other thing. It's one of the reasons why when I teach, I always try to define the term, and then right after I've named it, and then use it in context. So even if you know this thing by a different name, when I say this, you know that that's what I mean. Or if it's the same name that someone uses for something else, you'll know that in this context, I'm referring to this thing. Like, we have different definitions for the word pulse. And it's not that either of us are wrong, it's just that they come from different places. And when we talk about each other's thing, we mean the exact same thing, although we may use different words for it. So, you know, it's always helpful for students to go, oh, well, teacher just said, you know, oh, you need to use your core. It's okay to ask, well, when you say core, what do you mean? You know, and it's not uncommon for teachers just to use terms that they've learned from their teachers, who learned from their teachers, and maybe somewhere in there the definition got changed, or it was never right. Yeah, or it was never right to begin with. Like one of the things, like, you know, I've been teaching a bunch of classes this past year with musicians. and they're talking, and one of the students will go, so about syncopation, and we both, the musician and I, look at each other and we're like, subdivision. And they're like, wait, what do you mean? I haven't even told you that. Trust me, what you mean is subdivision. Syncopation is one thing, what they really mean is a subdivision, and we know that. And the question is, do we really want to go into correcting it, or want to let them continue to use the term, and just let it develop into two separate things? Yeah, it's sort of a half a dozen of ones instead of another, and so the most important thing is just making sure that you know what you mean, and then you can make yourself be understood to the person that you're talking to.
So, can we get into the pulse issue right now?
Sure.
I mean, I'd like to know, because you obviously have two different definitions, but I'd like to know, your definition and where that comes from. Like,
Sure.
why you call it that, why is that definition for you?
My dad's real mom was a blues singer in jazz, and she was super well known during in her area. Got a full ride scholarship to the Juilliard at 16. Couldn't go because the family was poor, and she was the only one bringing money in. Her dad had abandoned her mom, and her 3 siblings. So her singing in blues bars and jazz clubs was the only money that was coming in. So full ride scholarship to Juilliard, bye. And as a black girl at 16, it's practically unheard of. But she always refers to the pulse of the music, and she's talking about that heartbeat, that that ooh ta, that baseline rhythm. And so when I was learning the dance, she said, you gotta have the pulse, you gotta put that pulse in your body. She's talking about that physical expression of the baseline rhythm. And she didn't care, it didn't refer to any one way of doing it, just as long as it was there. So every movement that I did that showed where that baseline rhythm is was called the pulse in a generic standpoint.
Bingo. We can create body pulse in many, many different ways. We say pulse as an accent, this is what he's talking about. Pulse as an accent can be done in many ways. I can create a head pulse in my body, I can create a chest pulse in my body, I can create a hand pulse in my body. I can call all those things a pulsing action, because they qualify a rhythm base of the music that I'm trying to exemplify in my body. What I create in pulse as a dynamic, in the dynamics of movement, pulse is that heartbeat exactly, right? Your heart beats this way. Yeah, a speaker pulses this way. The body pulse as a dynamic is this way. Yeah, this is called, in dance dynamics, is called resilience, resilient action in your body. And this is called pulsing as a dynamic. As a descriptive accent, I can say, pulse your body left to right. Right? To get you to do this action, I can call it a pulse action because I actually am exemplifying this beat action with a specific movement. So in that context, to me, it depends on what context you're talking about it. In a base dynamic content, the way I learned pulse action was swing this way, because we have two pendulums that we use in the body to create this dynamic movement, right? And then we have resilience, which is this action in the body. If we take it as a staircasing action, it's called rise and fall. If we take it as a rhythm action in the body, up and down through the body, it's called resilience, something that moves up and down, resilient action.
So are those from the performing arts? Those
Yes.
terms?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah. So it's all about context. I can create all kinds of rhythmic quality and call it, okay, I want you to pulse your head to the rhythm. 1, 2, 1, 2, go ahead. You can do it. Come on.